6 months had passed since the human fleet first appeared in the Volani sky. The plague was gone. Not just contained, not just suppressed, but gone. Dr. Unji and her teams had eradicated it completely, burning it out of the soil, and the water, and the air, until there was nothing left. The last patient had been discharged from the last hospital 2 weeks ago. He was a young farmer from the eastern provinces who had been sick for 5 months. When he walked out of the hospital doors, a crowd of Volani and humans had cheered together, and the sound had carried across the city like music. The homeworld was alive again. The power grids hummed with energy. The water ran clean and cold. The farms were green with new crops, taller and healthier than anything the Volani had grown before. The cities buzzed with activity. Construction machines worked alongside Volani builders. Human engineers argued good-naturedly with Volani architects about the best way to design a bridge. Children played in streets that had been empty and silent 6 months ago. The outer colonies were reconnected. Every moon, every station, every settlement had been reached, resupplied, and repaired. Communication networks linked them all together, stronger than before. Trade routes that had been dead for months were flowing again. Ships moved between worlds, carrying food and medicine and building materials. It was time for the humans to go home. Tejo stood on the bridge of the Dawn of Sol and gave the order to begin withdrawal. It was a slow process. You could not move 100,000 people off a planet in a day. The hospital cruisers went first, their white hulls rising through the atmosphere like clouds returning to the sky. Then the engineering transports, loaded with the heavy equipment that had rebuilt a world. Then the warships, one by one, pulling back to orbit and forming up in the cold silence of space. But before the fleet left, there was one more thing to do. Doha had been invited to speak at the Galactic Council. This was unusual. The Volani were not a powerful species. They did not have a permanent seat on the council. They were rarely asked to speak, and when they did, nobody listened very carefully. But this time was different. This time every seat in the great chamber was filled. Representatives from 300 species sat in a vast circle, their eyes fixed on the small, frail figure who walked slowly to the central platform. Doha moved carefully, his forearms folded at his sides. He was still thin from the months of crisis, and his skin was still pale, but his eyes were clear and bright. Behind him, standing in the visitors section, were Tejo, Yuna, Unji, Hanul, Sora, Minji, and 24 other humans who had led the mission. They wore their dress uniforms, clean and pressed, and they stood in a neat row with their hands behind their backs. They looked like what they were, ordinary people who had done an extraordinary thing. The chamber fell quiet as Doha reached the platform. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the faces of the galaxy. Some were curious, some were skeptical. A few, from the smaller species, were hopeful. Doha began to speak. 6 months ago, I sent a signal into the darkness, he said. His voice was thin but steady. It was not a diplomatic message. It was not a negotiation. It was a cry for help. My people were dying. We had no medicine, no cure, no hope. We were watching our civilization collapse, and we could do nothing to stop it. He paused. The chamber was so quiet that the hum of the air systems could be heard. I sent that signal knowing that it would likely be ignored. I knew how this galaxy works. I knew that help does not come for free. I knew that every species in this chamber would calculate the cost and the benefit and decide, as they always do, that our suffering was not their problem. A few delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And I was right, Doha continued. Most of you did exactly that. The Trading Council filed our message away. The Dominion read it and laughed. Others felt sympathy, but did nothing. This is not an accusation. This is simply the truth. In this galaxy, compassion is a luxury that few can afford, and fewer choose to spend. He turned slowly, and looked at the humans standing behind him. His eyes met Yuna's, then Tejo's, then Sora's. Something passed between them that did not need words. But the humans answered, Doha said. His voice cracked on the word answered, and he paused to steady himself. The chamber remained silent. We asked for medical aid. We hoped for a shuttle, maybe a crate of medicine, maybe a few doctors. We would have been grateful for anything. We would have been grateful for a single kind word. He shook his head slowly, and a sad, amazed smile spread across his face. They sent a fleet. He turned back to the chamber. His voice grew stronger now, fueled by something that went beyond words. 12 warships, 6 hospital cruisers, 2 colony transports. 100,000 human beings who left their homes, their families, their lives, and crossed 11 days of open space to help a people they had never met. They brought medicine. They brought engineers. They brought food and water and power and machines. They brought their hands and their hearts, and they used both without hesitation. Doha's voice was shaking now, but he did not stop. They cured our plague. They rebuilt our cities. They repaired our power grids and purified our water and reconnected our colonies. They fed our hungry and healed our sick and held the hands of our dying. Their doctors worked until they collapsed, then got up and worked again. Their engineers built bridges in the rain and fixed pipes in the dark. Their soldiers carried children on their shoulders and handed out food in the streets. Tears ran down Doha's face. He did not wipe them away. And when they were done, when the plague was gone and our world was whole again, they prepared to leave. They asked for nothing. They demanded nothing. They did not plant a flag. They did not claim territory. They did not send us a bill. He stopped. The silence in the chamber was absolute. 300 species, some of them ancient and powerful, some of them young and small, all of them watching a frail old man stand on a platform and speak the truth. The delegate from the Dominion asked me yesterday what price the humans demanded for their help, Doha said. He asked me what deal we had made, what territory we had traded, what resources we had promised. Doha looked at the Dominion delegate. The large armored figure sat motionless in its seat. I told him the truth, Doha said, and I will tell all of you the same thing now. He drew himself up, his forearms unfolded, his thin body straightened, and in that moment, frail and old and scarred by months of suffering, Doha looked like the leader he had always been. They asked for nothing, he said. Nothing. The word hung in the air like a bell that had been struck and would not stop ringing. They asked for nothing, Doha repeated, softer now, because to them, helping us was not a transaction. It was not politics. It was not strategy. It was simply what they do. It is who they are. When humans see suffering, they do not calculate. They do not negotiate. They move. They build. They heal. They hold your hand in the dark and tell you that you are not alone. He looked at the chamber one final time. Every species in this galaxy has something they are known for. The Trading Council is known for its wealth. The Dominion is known for its power. The Volani were known for our pride. He paused. Humans are known for something else, something that none of us have ever truly understood until now. They are known for showing up. Not because they have to, not because they gain from it, but because someone, somewhere, is hurting. And for a human, that is reason enough. Doha stepped back from the platform. He did not wait for applause or questions. He simply turned and walked away. The chamber remained silent for a very long time. In the visitors section, Sora was crying. Minji was crying. Even Hanul, who never showed emotion, had tears in his eyes. Tejo stood straight and still, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on some point far away. Yuna stood beside him. She did not cry. She simply nodded, once, as if Doha had said something she had always known, but never needed to hear spoken aloud. Later that day, the fleet broke orbit. The ships turned away from the Volani homeworld and aimed themselves toward the distant light of Earth's sun. One by one, they engaged their engines and disappeared into the stars. Doha stood at his window in the capital tower and watched them go. The sky was violet again, clear and clean, the smoke long gone. The golden stars were coming out, one by one, the way they always had. But now there were new lights among them, the fading glow of human engines, growing smaller and dimmer as the fleet moved away. Doha watched until the last light disappeared, and then he stood there a while longer, looking at the sky. "They are gone," she said softly. "No," Doha said. He placed one hand against the window, and through the glass he could feel the warmth of a world that had been given back its life. "They are never truly gone. What they did here will be remembered by our children, and their children, and every generation that comes after." He turned to Bora and smiled. It was the first real smile she had seen on his face in a very long time. "The galaxy will forget many things," Doha said. "It will forget treaties and trade deals and borders and wars. But it will never forget the day the humans came, not with weapons, not with demands, just with open hands and the simple, stubborn belief that no one should have to suffer alone." He looked up at the stars one last time. "That," he said quietly, "is the most powerful thing in the universe." And far away, racing through the darkness toward home, 100,000 humans carried with them something that no weapon or currency could ever match. The knowledge that they had been needed, and they had answered, and that was enough. It was always enough. 3 weeks after the fleet arrived, the plague began to lose. Dr. Unji had set up her mobile laboratories in the heart of the capital, inside a building that had once been a school. Her teams worked in shifts around the clock, never stopping, never resting for more than a few hours at a time. They had taken samples of the plague from hundreds of patients. They had mapped its structure, studied its behavior, and identified its weaknesses. And then they had built a cure. It was not a perfect cure. Unji was honest about that. It would not save everyone. Some patients were too far gone, their bodies too damaged by weeks of infection. But for those who were still fighting, for those who still had strength left in their blood, the cure was a lifeline thrown across a dark ocean. The production began immediately. Hanul's engineers had rebuilt a factory on the outskirts of the capital, and within days, it was producing antiviral compounds at a rate that would have been impossible before the humans arrived. The medicine was loaded onto shuttles and flown to every corner of the planet. Doctors traveled with it, human and Volani, working side by side, injecting the cure into arms that had been waiting for death. The death toll slowed, then it stopped. Then, for the first time in 4 months, more Volani woke up in the morning, then died in the night. Doha received the news in his office. He sat very still for a long time. Then he folded his forearms on his desk, put his head down, and wept like a child. Bora stood behind him and said nothing. She simply placed one hand on his shoulder and let him cry. But Tejo knew the job was not finished. He had spent the past 3 weeks walking the planet, visiting cities and towns and villages that the plague had torn apart. He had seen the wreckage of a civilization that had been brought to its knees. The plague was being beaten, yes, but the damage it had left behind was enormous. Power grids had collapsed across the southern continent. Without electricity, water pumping stations had failed, and millions of Volani were drinking contaminated water that made them sick in new ways. Food distribution networks had broken down completely. Farms had been abandoned when the farmers died or fled. Warehouses full of grain had rotted, because there was no one left to transport it. The outer colonies were in even worse shape. The Volani had settlements on 3 moons and a dozen orbital stations, and most of them had sealed themselves off during the worst of the plague. Now they were running out of supplies. Their communication systems were damaged. Some of them had not spoken to the homeworld in weeks. They were alive, but they were alone and afraid and slowly starving. Tejo put together a full report and sent it to Admiral Yuna. He did not soften the language. He did not hide the scale of the problem. He described every broken road, every dead power station, every silent colony, and every hungry child he had seen. Yuna read the report in her quarters aboard the command ship. She read it once, then twice, then a third time. Then she picked up her communicator and contacted Tejo directly. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad," Tejo said. "The plague is being contained. Unji's cure is working, but the infrastructure is destroyed. These people cannot recover on their own. Not in a year, maybe not in 10 years. They need more than medicine. They need everything." Yuna was quiet for a moment. Tejo could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. The 7th Fleet was already the largest humanitarian mission in human history. The cost was enormous. The logistics were a nightmare. Every additional day they stayed meant more fuel, more supplies, more strain on a fleet that was already stretched thin. But Yuna did not think about costs. She thought about the child that Sora had saved in the first hospital. She thought about the old woman who had carried that child through empty streets because she had nowhere else to go. She thought about Doha, an old man who had swallowed his pride and begged the universe for help. "Then we fixed that too," she said. The order went out. More ships came. Transport vessels loaded with construction materials, agricultural equipment, communication arrays, and power generators. Engineers arrived by the thousands. Agricultural specialists who knew how to rebuild farms from bare soil. Communications experts who could reconnect an entire planet's network in a matter of weeks. Hanel took charge of the infrastructure rebuild. He divided the planet into sections and assigned teams to each one. Power grids were rebuilt from the ground up, using human technology that was more efficient and more durable than what the Volani had before. Water systems were overhauled. Roads were repaired. Bridges were rebuilt. Buildings that had been damaged during the chaos were torn down and replaced with new structures that were stronger and better designed. In the farming regions, human agricultural teams worked alongside surviving Volani farmers. They brought seeds that grew faster and produced more food. They brought machines that could plow and plant and harvest in a fraction of the time. They taught the Volani new techniques for soil management and irrigation. And the Volani taught them about the unique biology of their world, the specific nutrients their crops needed, the delicate balance of their ecosystem. Minji, Tejo's communications officer, led the effort to reconnect the outer colonies. She took a small team on a fast shuttle and visited each one personally. Some of the colonies were in desperate condition. On one moon, the inhabitants had run out of food 3 days before Minji arrived. She found them sitting in the dark, too weak to move, waiting to die. She fed them with her own ration packs and called in a supply ship that arrived within hours. On an orbital station, Minji found a group of Volani children who had been orphaned by the plague. They were being cared for by a single elderly worker who had kept them alive through sheer stubbornness and love. When Minji walked through the door, the children stared at her with huge, frightened eyes. They had never seen a human before. Minji knelt down to their level. She smiled, even though her heart was breaking. She pulled a small chocolate bar from her pocket, something she had been saving for herself, and broke it into pieces. She held them out to the children. The smallest child, barely old enough to walk, took a piece and put it in its mouth. Its eyes went wide. It had never tasted chocolate before. It looked up at Minji with an expression of such pure wonder that Minji had to look away for a moment to keep from crying. "More," the child said. It was the first word any of them had spoken. Minji laughed. She gave them the rest of the chocolate, and then she got on her communicator and made sure that station received enough supplies to last 6 months. The galaxy watched all of this with growing disbelief. The Trading Council observed the human fleet through their long-range sensors and could not understand what they were seeing. This was not a military operation. There was no conquest, no occupation, no flag being planted. The humans were simply building, fixing, healing, and they were doing it for free. The Dominion was less confused and more alarmed. They had always viewed humans as a minor species, loud and emotional, but ultimately insignificant. Now they watched a human fleet rebuild an entire civilization in real time, and they realized they had made a serious miscalculation. A species that could project this much power this quickly, not for war, but for mercy, was not insignificant at all. Other species, smaller ones, watched with something different in their eyes. They watched with longing. They watched and thought, if we were ever in trouble, would anyone come for us like that? And deep down, they already knew the answer. Tejo stood on the bridge of the Dawn of Sol and looked down at the Vellani homeworld. The smoke was clearing. The lights were coming back on. The cities were filling up again, slowly, carefully, like a heart learning to beat after it had almost stopped. He thought about the signal Doha had sent. That simple, desperate message, "We are dying. Please help." And he thought about the answer humanity had given, not in words, but in ships and hands and hours and sweat and kindness. An answer that said something so simple and so powerful that no other species in the galaxy had ever managed to say it. We are here. Doha had stopped hoping on the 4th day. He had sent the signal, and the silence that followed was louder than any answer could have been. No one had replied. Not the Trading Council, not the Dominion, not any of the dozens of species who had heard his message and decided that the dying of the Vellani people was not their problem. He had expected this. He had known, even as he told Bora to send the signal, that the galaxy did not work on kindness. It worked on profit, and the Vellani had nothing left to sell. The plague had reached the capital now. Doha could see it from his window. The streets that had once been filled with life were empty. Shops were closed, homes were sealed shut. Every few hours, a transport would move through the streets, carrying the dead to the burning fields outside the city, where the bodies were turned to ash. The smoke rose in thick black columns that stained the violet sky. Bora came to him every morning with reports, and every morning the reports were worse. The southern continent had fallen. The island colonies had gone silent. The orbiting stations had cut off all traffic, sealing themselves away in a desperate attempt to survive. The Vellani civilization, which had stood for 8,000 years, was breaking apart like a ship hitting rocks in a storm. On the 11th day, Doha was sitting at his desk when Bora burst through the door. She was running, which she never did. Her eyes were wide, and her 4 hands were shaking. For a terrible moment, Doha thought she was going to tell him that the plague had reached the capital tower, that they were finished. But she was not crying. She was smiling, and her smile was so bright that it hurt to look at. "Ships," she gasped. "There are ships in orbit." His old body protested, but he ignored it. What ships? Whose? Human ships. Dozens of them. They just appeared out of faster-than-light travel. Our sensors are still counting them. There are so many. Doha walked to the window and looked up. At first, he saw nothing, just the violet sky and the smoke. But then, slowly, he began to see them. Dark shapes against the light. 1, then 2, then 5, then 12. They kept coming. warships the size of mountains, their hulls black and heavy and bristling with weapons that could crack a planet in half. Hospital cruisers painted white, glowing like moons, transports so large they blocked out the stars. Doha's 4 hands gripped the windowsill. His eyes filled with water. In 40 years of leadership, he had never cried in front of anyone. But now, standing at his window, watching the sky fill with ships that had crossed the darkness of space to reach his dying world, he could not stop the tears. "We asked for medicine," he whispered. "They sent a fleet." The first shuttles came down within the hour. They descended through the smoke and the dust and landed in the open squares of the capital. Their doors opened, and humans poured out. Hundreds of them, then thousands. They wore white medical uniforms and carried bags of supplies. They wore heavy work suits and carried tools. They wore the gray uniforms of soldiers and carried nothing at all except their willingness to help. Medic Sora was one of the first on the ground. She was a young woman with short hair and quick hands who had graduated from medical school only 2 years ago. She had never left the solar system before, but when she stepped off the shuttle and saw the empty streets and the smoke and the silence, she did not hesitate. She turned to her team, 8 doctors and 20 nurses, and she pointed at the largest building she could see. "That one," she said. "We set up there. I want triage stations, quarantine zones, and a clean surgical area within 3 hours. Move." They moved, with the speed and efficiency that humans were famous for. Not because they were the fastest species in the galaxy, but because when humans decided something needed to be done, they did not stop until it was finished. Within 3 hours, Sora had a functioning field hospital. Within 6 hours, she had treated her first 100 patients. The Volani came in slowly at first, afraid and confused. They had never seen humans before. Humans were strange to them. They had only 2 arms. They smiled with their mouths, which the Volani found unsettling. But the humans were gentle. They spoke softly. They moved carefully. They touched the sick Volani with hands that were warm and steady, and they looked at them with eyes that held no judgment, no pity, and no expectation, just care. An old Volani woman came into Sora's hospital carrying a child. The child was burning with fever, and its small body shook with each breath. The woman's eyes were hollow with grief. She had already lost 2 children to the plague. She held this one as if it were the last light in a dark room. Sora took the child gently. She ran a portable scanner over its body and studied the results. The plague was in the child's blood, in its lungs, in its bones. It was dying. By every medical standard Sora knew, this child should have been dead already. But it was not dead. It was still fighting. Sora looked at the old woman and spoke through a translation device. "I am going to help your child. I need you to trust me." The old woman looked at Sora with eyes that had forgotten how to hope, but she nodded. Sora worked for 6 hours straight. She used every tool she had, every technique she knew, and a few she invented on the spot. She pumped antiviral compounds into the child's blood. She used a nano treatment to target the plague cells directly. She monitored every heartbeat, every breath, every tiny change in the child's condition. And slowly, impossibly, the fever broke. The child opened its eyes and looked up at Sora. It did not know who she was. It did not know where she had come from. But it reached up with one small hand and grabbed Sora's finger, and it held on tight. Sora smiled. Her eyes were wet, but her hands were steady. "You are going to be okay," she said. Outside the hospital, Engineer Hanul was already at work. He had brought heavy equipment, water purifiers, power generators, construction machines, and his teams were spreading across the city like ants building a nest. They tested the water and found it contaminated. Within hours, they had set up purification stations at every major intersection. They checked the power grid and found it failing. By nightfall, they had rerouted the system and restored electricity to the central districts. Hanul stood on a rooftop and looked out at the city. He could see human teams everywhere. White uniforms in the hospitals, gray uniforms in the streets, heavy machines moving through the rubble, lights coming on in buildings that had been dark for weeks. Tejo landed on the surface near midnight. He walked through the streets slowly, taking it all in. The scale of the suffering was worse than anything the signal had described. But the scale of the human response was matching it, step by step, hand by hand. He passed a group of human soldiers, handing out food to a line of Villani, who stretched around the block. He passed a team of engineers, welding a broken water pipe in the middle of the road. He passed a young human nurse sitting on a curb, holding a Villani elder's hand, while the elder wept. Tejo stopped and watched that scene for a long time. The nurse did not speak. She did not try to fix anything. She just sat there, in the dust and the smoke, holding a stranger's hand in the dark. That, Tejo thought, was why they had come. Not because of orders, not because of duty, but because somewhere deep inside every human being was a voice that said the same thing, over and over, in every language and every age. You are not alone. Above them the fleet hung in orbit, like a constellation that had not been there before. The Villani looked up and saw it, and for the first time in months, they felt something that the plague had almost killed. Hope. Admiral Yuna was not the kind of person who wasted time. She had earned her rank, not through politics or connections, but through years of hard decisions made under impossible pressure. She was small in size, but enormous in presence. When she walked into a room, people stopped talking. When she gave an order, people moved. She was in her office on the orbital station when Tejo's call came through. She had been reviewing supply reports, dull numbers on a dull screen, and she welcomed the interruption. But when she heard Tejo's voice and the words he spoke, the dullness vanished. She listened to the Villani distress signal in full. She listened to it a second time. Then she leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. How far is the Villani homeworld? She asked. 11 days at maximum speed, Tejo replied. And the plague? What do we know about it? Not much. The signal is basic. They are asking for medical supplies, antiviral compounds, anything we can spare. They specifically say they cannot pay. Yuna let out a slow breath. She had dealt with alien distress calls before. Usually the protocol is simple. You sent a small team, a medical frigate, some supplies. You helped where you could, you documented everything, and you went home. It was clean. It was efficient. It was safe. But something about this signal was different. Something about the way it was written. It did not use diplomatic language. It did not try to bargain or negotiate. It simply said, "We are dying, please help." Yuna had read thousands of official communications in her career. She had never read one that sounded so honest. She pressed a button on her desk and opened a channel to Fleet Command. Within minutes, she was speaking to the heads of logistics, medical, engineering, and defense. Their faces appeared on her screen in a neat grid, each one looking at her with the patient expression of people who expected a routine briefing. I am ordering the full deployment of the 7th Carrier Fleet to the Villani homeworld, Yuna said. The patient expressions disappeared. Lieutenant Jinho, the head of logistics, was the first to speak. He was a careful man. He liked numbers. He liked plans. He liked things that made sense. And what Yuna had just said did not make sense. Admiral, the 7th Fleet? That is 12 warships, 6 hospital cruisers, and 2 colony-class transports. That is a full military deployment. For a medical aid mission? Yes, Yuna said. With respect, Admiral, a single medical frigate could handle this. We send a team of doctors, a few crates of antiviral compounds, and we monitor the situation. That is standard protocol. I am not interested in standard protocol, Yuna said. Her voice was calm but firm, like stone wrapped in silk. I have read the signal. These people are not asking for a few crates. They are describing the collapse of their entire civilization. Their hospitals are empty. Their factories are shut down. Their population is dying by the millions. A single frigate is a bandage on a wound that needs surgery. Jinho opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He had worked with Yuna long enough to know when her mind was made up. Dr. Unji, the head of medical operations, leaned forward on her screen. She was a woman with kind eyes and steady hands, who had spent 15 years treating the worst injuries and diseases the galaxy could produce. Nothing surprised her anymore. But Yuna's order came close. If we are deploying the full fleet, I want every hospital cruiser loaded to maximum capacity, Unji said. Antiviral compounds, surgical kits, portable scanners, quarantine pods, water purifiers, nutrition packs. I want teams of specialists, epidemiologists, virologists, trauma surgeons, and I want volunteers. No one goes on this mission unless they choose to. Agreed, Yuna said. I also want mobile laboratories, Yunji continued. We do not know what this plague is. If we are going to stop it, we need to study it on the ground. I want to be able to analyze samples, develop treatments, and produce medicine locally. We cannot rely on supply lines that stretch 11 days across space. Yuna nodded. You will have everything you need. Engineer Hanel, a broad-shouldered man who spoke rarely but always said something worth hearing, raised his hand. Admiral, if their infrastructure is collapsing, medicine alone will not be enough. Sick people need clean water. They need power. They need functioning buildings and sanitation systems. I would like to bring engineering teams and construction equipment. Enough to rebuild, not just repair. Do it, Yuna said. Jinho rubbed his forehead. The numbers were spinning in his head. The fuel costs alone would be staggering. The supplies, the personnel, the logistics of moving 100,000 people across 11 days of open space. It was the largest humanitarian operation in human history. Admiral, he said slowly, the Council will ask questions. They will want to know why we are spending this much on a species we have barely had contact with. They will want to know what we are getting in return. Yuna looked at him. For a moment, the calm mask slipped, and something raw and bright burned behind her eyes. It was not anger. It was something older than anger. Something that had been passed down through generations of humans who had looked at suffering and refused to look away. Tell the Council, she said, that someone asked us for help. Tell them that we heard. Tell them that we are going. And if they want to know what we are getting in return, tell them to read the signal again and try to feel something. Jinho said nothing more. The order went out within the hour. Across the fleet, on ships and stations and bases, the word spread like fire. The Volani homeworld was dying. The 7th Fleet was going. And the volunteers came. They came in numbers that surprised even Yuna. Doctors who had been on leave canceled their vacations. Engineers who had retired came back. Soldiers who had never fought a battle in their lives signed up to carry medical supplies. Young cadets, fresh out of training, begged to be included. Tejo stood on the bridge of his ship, the carrier Dawn of Sol, and watched the fleet assemble around him. 12 warships, their hulls dark and heavy with armor. 6 hospital cruisers, painted white with red crosses that glowed in the starlight. 2 colony-class transports, each one large enough to carry a small city. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. His communications officer, a young woman named Minji, looked up from her console. Captain, the fleet is assembled. All ships report ready. Admiral Yuna is requesting a final confirmation. Teho looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 11 days away, a world was dying. An old leader named Doha was sitting in a tower, waiting for an answer to a prayer he had sent into the darkness. Teho picked up his communicator. "Admiral, the 7th Fleet is ready, awaiting your order." Yuna's voice came back, steady and sure. "All ships, set course for the Vallani homeworld. Maximum speed. We are not stopping for anything." The engines roared. The stars stretched into lines. And 100,000 humans raced toward a world they had never seen, to save a people they had never met, for a reason that needed no explanation. Because someone had asked for help, and humans always answered. The stars above the Vallani homeworld had always been beautiful. They were soft and golden, scattered across a violet sky like tiny seeds thrown by a careless hand. Children used to sit on rooftops and count them. Elders used to tell stories about them. But now, nobody looked up anymore. Now the only thing the Vallani could see was death. The plague had come without warning. It started in the eastern provinces, in the farming towns, where the air smelled like wet soil and sweet grain. A few workers fell sick, then a few dozen, then hundreds. Within a month, entire towns went silent. The hospitals filled up. The medicine ran out. The doctors worked until they collapsed, and then they died too. Doha stood at the window of the capital tower and looked out at his city. He was old. His skin had turned pale and thin, like paper, and his 4 arms hung at his sides like branches that had lost their leaves. He had been the leader of the Vallani people for 40 years. He had guided them through droughts and wars and famines. But this was different. This enemy could not be fought with weapons or words. It lived in the air. It lived in the water. It lived in the blood of every person it touched, and it killed them slowly, painfully, and without mercy. His assistant, a young female named Bora, walked in behind him. She carried a datapad in her small hands, and her eyes were red from crying. She had lost her brother 3 days ago. She had not taken a single day off. "The eastern provinces have gone dark," she said quietly. "No more signals, no more reports. We think the population there is gone." Doha closed his eyes. Gone. Such a simple word for such a terrible thing. 3 million Vallani. Gone. Farmers, teachers, children, elders, all gone. "And the medicine?" he asked. Bora shook her head. "We used the last supplies 2 days ago. The factories cannot produce more. The workers are dead or dying. We have nothing left." Doha turned away from the window. He walked slowly to his desk and sat down. His body ached. His heart beat unevenly. He was tired in a way that sleep could not fix. He was tired in his soul. "Then we must ask for help," he said. Bora looked at him with wide eyes. The Vallani had never asked anyone for help. They were a proud people. They had built their civilization alone, carved it from stone and starlight over thousands of years. Asking for help felt like admitting defeat. It felt like telling the universe that they were weak. "Who would we ask?" Bora whispered. "The Trading Council? They sell medicine at prices we cannot afford. The Dominion? They would demand territory in return. No one in this galaxy gives anything for free." Doha knew she was right. He had dealt with the other species for decades. Every agreement was a transaction. The galaxy ran on profit and power, and the Vallani had neither left to offer. But then he thought of the humans. He had never met a human. Few Vallani had. Humans were relatively new to the galactic stage. They had only been traveling between stars for a little over a century. They were loud and strange and emotional. They laughed too much. They cried too easily. The other species found them confusing. Some found them annoying. A few found them dangerous. But Doha had read the reports. He had read about how humans had sent food to the starving colonies on Reth. He had read about how human doctors had traveled to the plague zones on Alundi Prime and worked for months without payment. He had read about how a single human cargo ship had once stopped in the middle of a trade route to rescue a drifting Volani transport, even though it cost them fuel and time and money. The other species called humans foolish for these things. He called them kind. "Send a signal to Earth," Doha said. Bora stared at him. "Earth? The human world?" "Yes, but they are so far away, and they are small. They do not have the resources of the Trading Council or the Dominion. What could they possibly send us? A shuttle? A crate of medicine?" "Maybe," Doha said. "Maybe that is all they can send. But I would rather receive a small gift from a kind hand than a large one from a cruel one." Bora hesitated for a long moment. Then she nodded and left the room. The signal was sent that night. It was a simple message. It did not use fancy diplomatic language or complicated codes. It was written in plain galactic common, and it said exactly what the Volani needed it to say. "This is the Volani homeworld. We are dying. A plague has taken our people. We have no medicine. We have no cure. We are asking anyone who hears this message to send medical aid. We cannot pay. We can only ask. Please help us." The signal traveled outward at the speed of light. It passed through empty space, through asteroid fields, through the cold silence between stars. Most species who received it ignored it. The Trading Council logged it and filed it away. The Dominion read it and laughed. A few smaller species felt pity, but had nothing to spare. And then the signal reached Earth. It arrived at the United Fleet Command Station orbiting Mars on a quiet Tuesday morning. A communications officer picked it up, read it twice, and then forwarded up the chain. It passed through 3 departments and 2 committees before it landed on the desk of Captain Tejo. Tejo was a tall man with broad shoulders and calm eyes. He had served in the fleet for 20 years. He had seen battle. He had seen peace. He had seen the best and worst of what the galaxy had to offer. He read the Volani message once, slowly, and then he read it again. Then he stood up, walked to the bridge of his ship, and read it aloud to his crew. Nobody spoke. The silence lasted 10 full seconds. 10 seconds in which every person on that bridge thought about what it meant to be so desperate that you would send a message into the void and beg strangers for help. Tejo folded the message and put it in his pocket. He looked at his crew, engineers, pilots, medics, soldiers, and he saw the same thing in every pair of eyes. Not pity, not obligation, something deeper. Something that humans had carried with them since the very first time one of their ancestors had reached out a hand to help a stranger. "Get me Admiral Yuna," Tejo said quietly. "Now." And that was how it began.